Here I am looking like a bee. Solder girl's hair. Oh God. What we're going to do, we're actually going to do something in my soldering area, is I want to show you what happens with dirty metal and the flux. I also want to show you what happens with dirty metal and solder. So that's what we're going to do. So I've got a piece of unclean metal down here. And by the way, put your flux in like a top of a jar or a little glass thing like this when you're going to do it, so you don't keep dipping it in to your jar, and you don't have to put a ton. So I'm going to paint this on here now. See what it's doing? It is not wetting the surface, it's balling up. So that would be a huge issue if you're trying to solder a piece on top of here and you've only got flux over here. So that's one reason it has to be clean. Now let's watch what happens when I put solder on here and heat this up. Okay, what I'm doing here is we're going to show you what happens with solder with no flux and dirty metal. I'm heating it from behind just because I could heat it up here too. So this is really getting hot. Okay, so what we've got there is balled up solder. It didn't flow. So if you've ever had that happen, generally the problem is that your metal's dirty or it's not fluxed, and you need to clean it and start over again. So, and you could probably lay the solder on it, sand it down a little bit to try to take a little of the skin that formed after the heat treatment process, but this is not a good thing. Okay, so get your everything clean, hands, solder, flux, metal, and you will be much happier. I'm going to take these off. So on heat, I'm just going to reiterate the two things. Solder follows heat, and the metal needs to get to solder flow temperature, not the solder. Solder will flow automatically if both sides of the metal need to come to the same temperature at the same time. That's another important thing that I don't think I mentioned, because if not, one side gets hotter than the other and the solder is going to go over on the hot side. So that's really important to remember. Torch tips. Here's my big guy. He's a 5, and I used him in the video for making chasing and repoussé tools. I was heating up steel and I need to get it really hot. This is, I would use this if I was working on a rather large piece, maybe about this size or so, because with silver is the best heat conductor. You know, I think I mentioned that earlier, and as soon as you heat it, it starts running to the other sections of the piece. So you want to kind of heat the whole piece up at the same time. So if you've got a large piece, you want a bigger flame, so you don't have to go, let's say you have a sheet this big and you're over here with a little flame and you're like running around trying to keep, as soon as you get this warm, this part's cooled off. So if you're working on a big piece, use a bigger torch tip. If you're working on a little tiny piece, you can use a smaller one. This is a 2, I believe. And this gives me, the interesting thing is this chart down here, this one gives me about approximately on the, who's this, Smith's torch. My flame is about like that. So depending on your torch, there's a variance. Like here, look at the 2 on here compared to the 2 on here. Their 2 is really teeny weeny, and this one isn't. So it depends on what torch you have and what tips are available. And most of the suppliers will give you some idea of the flame size. So let's see, briefly, so one more thing I want to say is if you are ever doing soldering hollow things like these little repoussé pieces, chaser repoussé pieces, they are, the chaser repoussé part is soldered onto a flat backing. You have to have at least one little hole in the back to vent. If any moisture was in here at all and you didn't have these holes, this piece would blow out at its weakest point, and boiling hot metal coming at you is not a pretty thing. I put several holes in because it drains out the pickle a little quicker. And speaking of that, I'll mention briefly, when you have these kind of hollow construction, you want to boil it in you know, like 2 cups of water and a handful of baking soda to boil out the pickle, and then I would boil it in plain water to get the baking soda out. Really important because it's really hard to clean, and if you leave the pickle in here, it'll start to eat away. Fell out of my hand. Okay, we're going on to the next. There's basically 3 kinds of flux if you count the powders that are used to make a liquid. There's, you know, the liquid flux, paste flux, and the powders, like I said. The liquid flux advantages are it's see-through, so you can see the seam that you're working on, which is really nice. It also has a higher working range from 1100 to 1700 degrees, I believe, Fahrenheit. And that's important because you want your flux to be not burned off before your solder moves. So if you have a flux that burns off at like 1000 degrees and your solder melts at 1200 degrees, your flux is no longer functioning for you. You've burned it all off before the solder flows, which makes it not work. So the paste, I think it's 1100 to 1500 degrees, so it burns off 200 degrees quicker than the liquid. Disadvantage of the paste is that it's opaque and you can't see your seams. Generally, a lot of people use paste for larger objects. It's got better covering power. It also helps better in the prevention of fire scale. The liquid flux I use that all the time. I don't even use paste because of that visibility issue. So it's a matter, you know, it's a matter of personal preference. But for guidelines, I'd go with liquid. I'm gonna go liquid. I wanted to show you these little guys. This is an overkill on flux here. I mean, this is a lot of flux. I probably wouldn't have done that much because you don't really want to drown your piece in it because the solder, this is a fluid, and if you heat fluid up, it boils. And when you put little chunks of solder on top of boiling fluid, they go flying all over the place and get suicidal. So I would normally not have put this much on, but I just want to show you the color changes. This is actually started out clear, and at a certain temperature it starts to look like this, and then it becomes translucent at the next temperature range up. And you can see clearly here, even though there's little voids in this, you can see clearly what difference the flux made in keeping the oxidation down, which is on this side. So I feel like I'm jumping all over the place. I have so much garbage in my brain that I get flooded with information. I wanted to mention that when both the paste and the liquid flux reach a temperature where the solder will flow, they become translucent, which is really good to know when you're soldering on things like your settings or you're doing sweat soldering. Another thing I'd like to talk about with the flux is if you do flood it, you can wick off the excess, and you should wick off the excess with either a dry brush, paintbrush, or paper towel. When applying flux, you don't use really crappy brushes. You don't want to use plastic because it's really hard to control picking up the little pallions of solder if you're using pallions and placing them on to your piece. So a decent hair brush, you know, like Badger or something like that. Don't buy those plastic dollar store ones. You will be very unhappy. Plus they melt if you happen to touch your piece with them. So don't go with those. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Oh, flux is a mild acid, so you need to make sure that after you've soldered that you remove the flux, and that's another reason for pickle. Pickle removes oxides, and it also removes flux. So don't forget to pickle your stuff. And one more or two, I got a cheat. I think we got one more. Flux does not like shiny metal. I don't know why, but they don't like each other. So you really, if you've got a really, which this isn't really shiny, but I would do this anyway. If you've got shiny brand new metal. This is 1000 grit sandpaper. Go ahead and, you know, rub it down with the sandpaper. Another cool thing about putting this little tooth on here is you're also taking off any excess, any dirt or grease that may still be present on the metal. In my how to clean jewelry video, clean metal video, I can't remember the name of it, I talk about sheeting, and to check to see if your metal's clean is put it under the faucet, and if the water sheets off of it, it's clean. If it balls up, you need to go back to the drawing board. So that's that on Flux for now. I'll have more information on my website than is coming out of my mouth because there's a lot in here and it's just filed down deep. So okay, so that's it for our four imperatives to make sure that your soldering is a pleasant experience. It's not really easy to say this with a heart face. I can't even say it. Our next video is going to be butt, sweat, and tea joins. The 3 basic soldering joins. So it's an unfortunate ordering of words, but it's pretty funny. So we're going to show you how to do a butt join, a tea join, and a sweat solder join. So I bet you just can't wait to see those. Butt, sweat, tea. Woo! Well, this is Nancy L.T. Hamilton. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you learned a little more about soldering. I know I want to learn a little less about it. Thanks for coming. Talk to you soon. See you soon. Visit with you soon. Bye.